Good evening, everyone. This is a regular session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, June 23rd. The time is 6:30 p.m. The first item on our agenda is roll call. Susan Axelrod. Here. Liz Carp. Here. Paul Jordan. Here. Oren Monaco. Here. Robin Pothier. Here. Caper Wilson. Here. And Maria Mack is here. We have no approval of minutes. The first item under subdivision and land development projects is 2001 Kingstown Road. We have a request by the applicant to continue this item until July 28th. Jamie, do you have anything other than that specific request?
No, associated with that request, the applicant and their engineer has been working on a reconfiguration of the site to address some of the planning board members' concerns as well as the planning department's.
Okay, very good. Would someone like to make the motion to continue this item to the July 28th, 2026 regular session?
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Caper. We have a second from Paul. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Nays, motion carries. Next agenda item is recommendation to Town Council, Old Tower Hill Road Neighborhood Project Form-Based Code Review and recommendation to the South Kingstown Town Council. And since we are going to be talking about dates with regard to that, Jamie has asked us to consider in July. Our normal work session would be the 14th, and asked if we can move it to the 21st. And it's on that date that we would have the recommendation, or it says that we'd have the draft form-based code recommendation on the 21st, and on the 28th, we would vote on the form-based code recommendation to the town council. But if folks could check, if you know now your availability on the 21st rather than the 14th for a work session. It's probably a Tuesday. I'm looking right now.
It's the third Tuesday.
It's the third, yes. Everyone available?
So wait, one more time?
So our work session will move from the 14th to the 21st.
I think it's okay.
Okay. And then as normal, our regular meeting would be the 28th. Okay. Jamie, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we mentioned at our last meeting, we did do a presentation with the Town Council. The Town Council is scheduling a public hearing in August for we'll say the official introduction to the form-based code that the planning board has been working on for over 12 months on the regulatory side, and working on the project over the last 24 months with Able City East, Pam, and Jason King. We have a final document that Andy is going through with the department, and we'll say dotting I's and crossing T's, so there will be some changes there. I received some comments from a couple of planning board members that we are communicating those to our legal counsel and making sure we are either incorporating them, modifying, or having answers for those questions associated with the regulations. I think in this instance, the form-based code is new to the community, but not new as a regulatory tool. And I think the planning board understands that. The form-based code, in essence, is no different than if we took the old Tower Hill Road and created 5 new commercial zones and had a commercial highway zone 1, a commercial highway zone 2, a commercial highway zone 3, a commercial highway zone 4, and a commercial highway zone 5. and then had standards for all separate zones. Instead of incorporating that into the existing zoning code, we've chosen to repackage that and do it in a separate addendum to the zoning code, with the understanding that it's more form-based and less Euclidean-based. And Euclidean meaning the historic nomenclature of zoning that separated uses. You know, in the Euclidean model, you have industrial was separate from commercial, which was separate from residential. And even within commercial didn't mix certain uses. I think as time evolved, commercial allowed some light industrial then allowed some commercial, but traditionally, all potentially incompatible uses that were viewed as such by a municipality were completely separated and in their own distinct districts. Under the form-based code, you are less concerned about that separation of uses, and you are more concerned about the pedestrian walkability and building form contained within the area. And then you look at the use list and predetermine what would be acceptable uses if they were mixed. Is it okay to have first floor retail office and second and third floor residential? Is it okay to have a office complex on 2 floors and then have 3 floors of residential? So saying that, they're less concerned about separating commercial from residential and actually afford opportunities to mix those uses within individual properties and within individual buildings. The trade-off to that increased density and mixed use is some architectural standards that are being viewed as South Kingstown appropriate, and also additional landscape standards, stormwater management standards. And instead of establishing setbacks that the applicant can decide whether they have to adhere to them. And as an example, in some of our zones, we have a 30-foot front yard setback. That just means that you can't build a building in the first 30 feet, but nothing in our regulation prohibits an applicant from putting a building 100 feet from the front property line and then putting parking in front of the building and minimal landscaping. The form-based code kind of turns that on its head and has what's called build 2 lines, where the buildings are supposed to be street orientated with parking on the side and rear. That's a little bit of change in the traditional Euclidean setback, where there are setbacks but no mandatory placement of a building on a property. And the form-based code encourages buildings to be built up front, parking on the side and rear, and that's within the regulating code. In discussions with legal counsel, primarily Andy Tights, who's somehow, I don't know if he got the short straw in the law firm, but Andy's been our go-to guy on looking at the code and making it Rhode Island friendly, as well as South Kingstown friendly, and he's working on that and gave us some language to work on incorporating into the code recently. Normally, council refers the matter to the planning board for review and opinion back to them, which they have done. In a normal scenario with a simple zone change, the planning board would come up with findings of fact, compatibility with the comprehensive community plan, but it's my understanding that based on conversations held at the planning board level, economic development and affordable housing, that the referral that goes back to the town council should include that standard language, but perhaps should include some additional language about the history of how you came to the form-based code, why you're suggesting these regulatory changes, and how you feel as a planning board this adds value and opportunity to the community. and I'm not necessarily talking about economic value, that regulations are community-based. They're typically not individual property owner-based. When the town adopted zoning, they looked at how they wanted the community to develop. They didn't look at how an individual person wanted their individual or multiple properties to be developed. And I think going through the charrette and the workshops, that the planning board has looked at this as a community-driven process to articulate a vision for the future of this commercial corridor, and understand that that has implications on individual properties within the corridor, but that the overall objective is to enhance that area with a well thought out and crafted regulation that achieves a community objective. And my initial understanding of that community objective was to get away from the automobile-centric development that has occurred from, we'll say, 1960 to 2026, because we have had recent projects in 2025 and one that just wrapped up construction in 2026 that are not necessarily pedestrian walkable friendly. They're more automobile centric, and none of the recent projects have a residential component because a residential component in the commercial highway district is not allowed. So again, the form-based code would allow a mix of commercial, whether it's retail, service, or office, combined with residential on one site, which the code currently doesn't do. So I would like to hear from the planning board members on how we structure a draft for your review at your July meeting, whether the planning department's working with the planning board or assigning one or two people to work with the planning department as well as legal counsel to develop a draft motion worded in a favorable manner for review at your July meeting.
Jamie, so you were making reference to the history and the expectations and the value to the community. That sounds as though it would be part of a narrative versus something contained within the formal draft motion, or how are you envisioning this to happen?
And I think that's a discussion with the planning board and legal counsel of how that could be. That could be an introductory statement to the findings. That could be a findings supported by a statement. We haven't written one like this,
Yep.
but you are used to, in your findings, developing additional language that brought you to the conclusions in your finding.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at almost a statement, and that statement may be 1, 2, 3 pages,
Okay.
either
Okay.
as an introduction
Mm-hmm.
to why you came to the findings you have, or as support just behind your findings. So again, format before,
Yep.
prior, but I think it's important that you support how you made the conclusions in your findings. Because it's not just simply, we got a document from our consultant, we looked at it over a couple of weeks and made a decision that it's consistent with our comprehensive
Yep.
community plan. You've spent a lot of resources, time and effort, and not just financial resources, but your time, the community's time. This wasn't a document that the planning department sat in their office one day and decided to write a form-based code. This, to me, was very grassroots by some boards and commissions in town who felt there needed to be an alternative to the way that commercial corridor has developed over the last 40 years.
So, Jamie, in order for this to not become, or at least initially not be just sort of the planning tech speak, it would be important to discuss how this evolved, the history, the expectations, the value to the community, but also the different things that might not be inherently obvious to someone reading the code. The position that we are in now with regard to stormwater and how that could change, things like lighting, green space, heat island effect, ingress and egress, because there's a lot of danger currently, and for certainly any pedestrian or someone on a bike traveling along that corridor, so safety issues, better delineated parking, the whole thing being pedestrian oriented. When we had the site, when we had the walk, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I don't think we had any council people on that walk.
No, I'm not aware of any.
But
It was very cold, I remember that.
yes, but architectural standards, true mixed use, appropriate lighting, and so on, that needs to be conveyed in some sense, both in language with, I don't know if photographs of existing conditions would help, because a visual is always great. It's better than 3 pages of text. But I'd like to hear how other people think we can convey this to the council who may not be used to reading zoning language. Liz?
I'm just wondering, as we talk about history and expectations, I don't know if it would be a positive or a negative to bring in examples of other communities. The positive would be, we didn't just pull this out of the air. There is some precedence for what we're talking about here and the expectations. I think the negative is we don't want to just say, well, we saw what they did in Wellesley, Mass, and it's so cool, we want to do it here. So I don't know how you bring that in, but I think there is some value in what others are doing and how that, what the results have been, the positive results.
So I was just thinking about sort of the why, and this is one of the main corridors into town. I think for a lot of people, it's the first thing they see, and it's not a particularly nice introduction to town. I think that vision of having people living, working, shopping there, of it being walkable, of there being more landscaping, I think it has a real appeal. And I think the fact that, I've watched some of the past hearings, the fact that economic development seems to be in favor of this. I know they were involved in discussions early on. Housing folks seem to be interested, adding more apartments always seems to be a place where we struggle. So I think there are a couple of really good reasons for promoting this. And I was thinking the same thing as Liz. If there are other communities that, adopted this, we know it's going to take a while. So are there communities that have adopted this 20 or 30 years ago where we can say, they went from this to this, or I don't know how easy it would be to find examples from 30, here's what it looked like and here's what it looks like now. But it isn't going to improve at all as it currently stands. So.
Maria,
Liz, go ahead.
I just want to emphasize something that you said, and that was the safety aspect. I tend to do a lot of walking down Main Street, and it's really unpleasant, and it's dangerous to walk past Kingstown Road in that intersection, down toward Shaw's. It's horrible. And I think the safety aspect is so important. And it gets back to the whole pedestrian-centric. And then, of course, there's the Bank of America Plaza, which every time my husband's so tired of hearing me say, oh my God, we've got to do something about this. It's just disaster.
Susan?
So what I jotted down when we were talking, and the way, I need to think it through, but the way I might structure this is to say either the word recognizing or believing, recognizing that, and then do bullet points. The community supports, and then that point. The economic value of, and then that point. Other communities have benefited by, and then that point. The long-term development in this area has resulted in this situation we're in, and sort of go through that way and go through our points. Stormwater, that this area was designed during an era when, cars were the mode of transportation for the community, that public safety, and go through each of the points and make them tight, but go through sort of a bulleted shopping list of all of the reasons that we're standing behind this proposal, and then finish it off with, finishing that sentence, believing that all of these things, the planning board hereby submits this ordinance to for your consideration, and then maybe address 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 points of all the different reasons that we've stood up and said that this is a good idea for the community. And then we can talk about the safety, and we can talk about other communities, and we can talk about all those things that have brought us to this belief that this is to be submitted. And that might be the way that I would maybe structure that letter.
I like that proposal a lot, but I think you want to include that by way of introduction. Jamie made the point that the community has been involved in this process all along. I think every single presentation we've heard has had a lengthy introduction that makes those points. I think we need a short introduction that makes those points, and it can reference, you might want to reference some of those earlier presentations, because that's a way of incorporating those documents into our findings of fact.
It wouldn't hurt to somewhere along the way have a reminder, unless you feel that you've already done so in the presentations to them, showing the images of the people that attended the 5-day charrette.
And I think one other thing, we have, I think, made an emphasis on the aesthetics. We've shown a number of different renderings. This is what it could look like. This is what this building could look like. And I think that's, of course, very important. But I think the really pragmatic issues that Susan just raised have to be of equal standing.
Paul?
Is it worth pointing out that this is also a more, I don't know if efficient is the right word, but a more efficient use of the land? I mean, right now, Shaw's closes, I don't know, at 9 o'clock, and that property sits vacant for, 12 hours a day. I mean, now you've got a piece of land that has multiple uses on it. There's more activity. There's more eyeballs. You know what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it well, but.
It's a good example of smart growth.
Yeah, okay.
And I think one of my bullets would have been, they don't agree on everything, but they all agree that we need more housing and more diverse housing in this town. And so that and especially housing near amenities, transportation, and the core of the town.
Right.
And so to point out that this satisfies that desperate need of this town, in addition to all the other things that it's stormwater, it's safety, it's all the other things, it's really addressing our housing shortage and its diversity of housing. Small apartments, bigger apartments, however that works out in town, that is a need that everyone can come together and recognize that. And that should be in there too, as a driving force.
Does this address stormwater? I mean, we already have stormwater compliance regulations. If you redevelop the property, you've got to do something. So how does this additionally protect stormwater?
I believe that part of the code requires well, you're going to create more of an issue with stormwater once you have more lot coverage, but you're also going to increase pervious surfaces. So theoretically, it should help to address the current non-compliance, or whatever that term is that DEM uses.
Yep, so Madam Chair, on that, we understand that any development that comes through goes through an extensive permitting process with DEM, but DEM's looking at sizes, quantifying flows based on rainfall, storage, and then mediating that storage capacity. The code talks about the incorporation of stormwater management into the site a little different than it's traditionally treated in a commercial setting, where you just dig a big hole and let the water go to some back corner of the property. That there's more initiative within the code to have people do water quality basins, work that into the landscaping, given the density, have infiltration that goes into underground storage so that you can become denser, but not just pipe it to the back corner of the property and out of sight, out of mind. So it's trying to be more comprehensive in the way you treat and incorporate stormwater management within your development versus just piping it to an underutilized portion of the property.
Armin?
I think we need to recognize that the image of South Kingston is changing, and by dealing just with this particular area, though, we show a vision of the future, but at the same token, since it's only this area, we're not going to impact the villages, the concept of the villages. And I think we need to tell people that this is just this particular area, and it's the vision for this area. And the town is changing, but we don't want to lose the flavor of the villages. So that's why we're zeroing in just on this particular area.
Yes, very well put. Susan?
But actually furthering that, we're almost trying to make this space as appealing and as charming as all those villages that we love in this town. Like, really compare any of the other villages to that stretch of Old Tower Hill Road the way it stands now, and it's almost like a whole nother world, where we have the potential to make this space just as charming as any other village in this town. And that's, I think, something that we should
And I think
mention.
that's what we need to stress, is that we want to make this area now as appealing as all the other villages are, but in its own way. We don't want to duplicate everything, because we want to maintain the character of everything and keep the separate identities.
Anything else from anyone?
Peter, do you have anything to add?
Okay, so according to the time frame that you mentioned, so July 28th is when we would vote to send our recommendation to the council. We would see it, see the narrative on the 21st.
So our
Or see
intent, Madam Chair, would to bring draft language
Draft.
to you on the 21st. That would be incorporated with your agenda. Worst case, your agenda goes out and we email it to you Friday or Saturday if we're still searching for the right verbiage. And the earliest you could act on it was the 21st. If we did everything appropriate and you liked the wording, you could act on the 21st. If we needed to make some revisions, you could table action on it. We could make the revisions if they're beyond simple, and have them for you basically a week later.
Caper?
I just wanted to make the point that I think we should get the draft language enough in advance so that we have an opportunity to review and come in with any articulated recommendations. So you kept shortening the amount of time that we were going to have to read, and I want to push back on that and suggest that we get the draft no later than when we get the agenda.
Our goal would be to send it out with the agenda, which it typically goes out the Wednesday or Thursday before. I do have a commitment in the first 2 weeks of July where I have limited availability, so I'm asking for perhaps 24-hour grace period. But again, our intent would be to send it out on that Wednesday or Thursday before. So.
Sounds good, Jamie.
And then- Sorry, can I have one more question?
Yeah.
So that's for the covering letter and motion that we're sending to the council. Will we see another final version of this before, so that we also know exactly what we're giving them? Will that be available for us to look at
That is
too?
also our intent. So again, I've been, Andy and I are balancing schedules. He has some time out of the office, so we're trying to make some of the revisions to give him adequate time to review it, so we can re-review it, back to Andy, then back to us. So,
And once we get beyond that July 28th date, how soon will you know when the council will have their public hearing on this?
I believe their intent is to have the public hearing on August 11th.
Correct. Monday is a holiday. It's Victory Day on the 10th, so they get kicked to the Tuesday, the 11th.
Okay. And consequently, our meeting is the, our
13th.
work session is the 13th, yes. All right, and can you keep us informed in case that changes, just because?
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that folks in the community who attended the charrette would be interested in attending that hearing as well.
I mean, we have to send out, I'll say plus or minus 248 notices to the property owners that will be affected by the map change and language associated with the new code.
Okay. All right, let's move on. We have a report from the administrative officer. Are there any questions on that?
No, nothing significant that's come in. We do have some potential administrative review associated with Sheldon's furniture conversion to the hotel. It's a back stairway entry where they had a basement entrance and then the equivalent of a first floor entrance. They may be swapping them from right to left to right. They had a little more solid railing associated with that. Again, it's back of house. They're looking to potentially go with a cable type rail system, cap rail, but the spindles would be cable versus a hard spindle. But again, it's combining a little bit of modern interpretation of a historic vernacular. Again, back of house faces a parking lot, is not street facing. We have a meeting on that on Thursday. We have potentially a couple other administrative actions pending with regards to lot line movements or 1-2 lot type subdivisions with existing street frontage, but nothing out of the ordinary in a normal month.
And next item, we need a member for the next TRC meeting, which is on July the 8th. Great. Morning? Morning, okay? Okay. If there's nothing else, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn? Motion from Liz, second from Paul. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thanks, everyone.
You almost